Hello. My name is Luna, and I never thought the worst moment of my life would come not in the form of illness, or loss, or even death. No. It came on a bright Sunday afternoon at Bluebell Lake, Montana, during what was supposed to be just another family barbecue. The kind of day that smells like grilled corn and sunscreen. The kind of day when you lay out folding chairs on worn grass, pour limonade into paper cups, and listen to the younger ones argue over Bluetooth speakers. I had been looking forward to it. He even made my signature deviled eggs extra paprika, just the way Jackson used to like them when he was little. But the boy who once snuck into my bed during thunderstorms, clutching his dinosaur plushie, was no longer that boy. He was 19 now. Tall, athletic, and mean in a way that didn't raise red flags until it was too late. There were maybe a dozen of us on the lakeside dock that afternoon. Jackson had brought his college buddies loud, sunburned, and already a few beers in. My son Mark and his wife Brittany were there too, sipping hard seltzer and flipping burgers while ignoring everything else. It was the usual gathering. Familiar. Harmless. At least, it used to be. I don't know what made Jackson decide that I was the day's entertainment. Maybe it was peer pressure. Maybe it was something darker. But I'll never forget the way his voice dropped when he came up behind me. "Kimmel, Grandma," he said. "Let's see if you can still swim like you used to." I turned, laughing nervously. "Jackson, don't be silly. I haven't swam in years." But he wasn't smiling the way he used to. It wasn't mischief in his eyes. It was performance. And before I could move, his hands strong, cold were on my back. A hard shove. My feet left the dock. Time froze. Then splash. The water hit me like a wall. Ice cold. Numbing. Unforgiving. Panic shot through me like electricity. I thrashed. Gasped. Tried to scream, but the lake rushed into my throat like punishment. The pain was immediate. Not just physical, but shame. Powerlessness. I hadn't swam since my rotator cuff surgery 10 years ago. My doctor told me I shouldn't risk it. Not with my arthritis. Not with my age. I was 68. And sinking. When I finally surfaced choking, sputtering, my eyes stinging from the algae, I looked back at the dock. Jackson stood there, arms folded, grinning. His friends burst into laughter. Mark didn't move. Brittany took a sip of her drink and muttered something that would ring in my head for weeks. "She's being dramatic." I don't remember how I got out. Maybe it was muscle memory. Maybe fear. Maybe God. But somehow, my legs kicked hard enough. My arms clawed through the weight of water and humiliation, and I crawled back to the edge like something half alive. No one helped me. Not one person reached a hand. My knees scraped across the wooden dock, my dress clinging to my body like seaweed. And there was Jackson again looking down. That same smirk plastered across his face. "Guess you can swim after all," he said. "Tough old bird." "Huh," they all laughed. It echoed. That sound. The laughter. It wasn't just cruel. It was final. It told me everything I had refused to believe for years. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just stood up. Soaked. Humiliated. And suddenly very awake. Because in that exact moment, as water dripped from my hair and my heart pounded like a war drum, I realized something no one else on that dock knew. They thought I needed them. They were wrong. And that was the beginning. I didn't speak a word the rest of that afternoon. I walked back to the picnic table like a ghost. My shoes squished with lake water. My cardigan stuck to my skin. And my hands trembled not from cold, but from something deeper. Something ancient. Betrayal. And not just from Jackson. No one asked if I was all right. No one handed me a towel. Mark stood by the grill, flipping burgers like nothing had happened. Brittany was laughing with someone on speakerphone, a glass of white wine in her hand. Her sunglasses perched like a shield between her and any form of accountability. And Jackson, he was already on his phone, scrolling, smiling, showing something to his friend, while droplets from his swim trunks formed little puddles on the dock. I stood there, soaked to the bone, watching the family I raised return to their conversations as if I were just background noise. Like static on the radio they'd grown used to ignoring 7 times C-flash in WW, actually www.a. I sat on the edge of the bench, not saying a word. I didn't trust my voice yet. If I opened my mouth, I feared what would come out wouldn't be words, but something feral. Instead, I watched them. Not like a mother or a grandmother. No. Something had shifted. I watched like a witness at a trial. Seeing it all for the first time, every dismissive gesture, every sidelong glance, every joke at my expense. They didn't see me. And in their minds, maybe I didn't exist anymore, not the way I used to. Not as someone with thoughts, memories, boundaries. Not as Luna. I thought of something my friend Evelyn had said the week before over coffee. People show their true selves when they think you're done being useful. God. She was right. Later that evening, back at the house, I peeled off the wet clothes in the guest bathroom, the one no one used but me. I dried myself with an old towel I kept for emergencies. It was thin, faded pink, fraying at the edges. I looked in the mirror. What stared back at me was not a woman who needed help. It was a woman who had given too much for too long. Hair matted, skin pale, knees bruised. And yet, I didn't look weak. I looked weathered, like a storm-beaten cliff. Still standing, when I stepped into the kitchen, the lights were low. The dishwasher hummed. Brittany was showing Jackson a slideshow of beach resorts on her laptop. No one looked up. No one asked how I felt. Jackson didn't even glance my way. I sat quietly at the breakfast table, listening to them plan a vacation to Cancun. Jackson mentioned needing to decompress after finals. I wanted to laugh just a little. The irony of that, the house I had built brick by brick, dollar by dollar, buzzed with conversations I wasn't part of. The refrigerator was stocked with food I'd bought. The walls hung with pictures I'd framed. The couch they lounged on had been selected after months of browsing catalogs I'd paid for. And yet, there I sat, invisible. I thought about when Jackson was 7 and used to crawl under this same table during thunderstorms, clutching a flashlight, asking me if angels aged. Back then, I was everything to him. I was comfort, warmth, the one who always remembered the nightlight, the extra pillow, the favorite bedtime story. Now I was just a shadow he'd learned to walk past. It didn't happen overnight. The cruelty, this emotional erosion, it came slowly. Eye rolls when I told stories. Snide jokes about how I stir my tea. The way Brittany would mimic my voice when I left the room, I used to laugh it off. I'm just old-fashioned, I'd say, but it wasn't harmless. It was permission. And I had given it. Over and over. That night, I sat in my bedroom, the same room where I used to keep a box of Jackson's baby teeth and school drawings under the bed, and I opened my journal. I wrote one sentence: they stopped seeing me long before I disappeared. And then I added one more, but now I'm starting to see myself again. I didn't know what came next. But I knew something had ended. And maybe, just maybe, something else was finally beginning. It was the next morning when I heard the knock on the side door. Not the front one, never the front. Evelyn Ross had never used it. Not in the 35 years we'd known each other. She said the front door was for strangers, salesmen, and people who needed appointments. Friends come through the kitchen. Open up. Luna, she shouted through the screen. I brought muffins and opinions. I smiled before I even stood. My knees were still sore from the dock. My back ached. But something in her voice, sharp and familiar, cut through the fog in my chest. When I opened the door, there she was, oversized sunglasses, turquoise windbreaker, a brown paper bag in one hand, and 2 cups of coffee in the other, like she was preparing to negotiate a hostage situation. Jesus, you look like hell, she said, brushing past me and setting everything on the counter. Sit. I'll pour. I sat. Because with Evelyn, you don't argue. You receive. She poured coffee into the good mugs, my floral ceramic ones I usually saved for holidays, and passed one to me like it was medicine. Then she narrowed her eyes. They did something. I nodded. Just once. That's all she needed. She didn't gasp. She didn't coo. No, performative sympathy. Just silence for a beat. And then it's time. Time, I said. Time for what Evelyn reached into her bag, not for a muffin. Not even for a napkin. She pulled out a manila folder. This, she said, sliding it across the table. Me lawyer's card. And a list of every account you told me about last year when we did your taxes. I stared at her. You kept that. I keep everything, she said, sipping her coffee. Especially when my best friend is handing out her love and legacy like it's Halloween candy to people who'd shove her into a damn lake. I looked down at the card. Michael Devlin, estate planning attorney. Clean serif font. Firm handshake kind of man. I don't know, I said quietly. It feels final. You don't want final, Evelyn said, leaning back. You want permission. That's different. Her voice wasn't judgmental, just matter of fact. Like she was reading a weather report I didn't want to believe. She reached over and placed her hand on mine. You paid for Jackson's braces. His field trips. That secondhand keyboard he used to call his magic machine. You kept his name on your insurance when Mark lost his job. You bought groceries for a house you didn't even eat in half the week. I wanted to help. I murmured. I know, she said gently. You're better than them. That's the problem. The words sank like stones. I stared out the window at the little garden Cliff and I built our first spring in Lakefield. The azaleas were blooming again, stubborn flowers, slow to open, hard to kill. I felt like that. I don't want revenge, I said. Evelyn didn't even flinch. Of course you don't. You want release. She was right. I didn't want to scream. I didn't want to torch the family photo albums or show up at Jackson's college and throw his tuition paperwork at his feet. I didn't want spectacle. I wanted peace. The kind that comes when you finally stop begging to be seen. Evelyn stood up and pulled me to my feet by the shoulders. We're going into town. You're going to eat something that didn't come from a freezer. And then we're calling Michael Devlin. I haven't been to that cafe in months. Perfect, she said, grabbing her keys. Let them see what strength looks like in cardigans and crow's feet. As we drove with the windows down and the spring air rushing through my thinning hair, something stirred in me, something I hadn't felt in years. Not anger. Not sorrow. Power. Maybe I hadn't been erased after all. Maybe I just needed to stop writing myself out of the story. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like turning the page. The thing about pretending to fall apart is that it doesn't take much. Just a pause here. A staggered breath there. Let your fingers fumble when pouring tea. Let your eyes wander mid-sentence like you're searching for something you forgot. Let the silence linger a little too long. People fill in the blanks for you. That's what I did. I let the cracks show. Not the real ones, the ones they were eager to see. It started the week after Evelyn and I met with Michael Devlin. The paperwork wasn't signed yet. Not officially. But the gears were turning. And I needed to know what I was really dealing with. Not just in theory, but in truth. So I played the part. I forgot which day the trash went out. I left the television on too loud in the middle of the night. I asked Brittany the same question twice at dinner just to see if she'd notice. She did. "Oh no," she said, barely hiding her grin as she spooned kale salad onto her plate. "I think it's starting. Starting. The decay. The descent. The decline they were waiting for. Like vultures circling a deer that's only limping." Jackson was worse. He started grunting instead of greeting me. If I asked him to carry groceries, he'd sigh so dramatically you'd think I'd asked him to carry the Ark of the Covenant. One afternoon, I sat in the den reading and let my teacup shake just enough that it rattled on the saucer. Jackson walked past, looked at my hands, and said, "You should probably talk to someone about that." "About what?" "Dear," I asked. "You know," he said, already turning away. Getting old. That night, I heard Mark whispering in the kitchen while he thought I was asleep. I wasn't. "She's slipping," he said. "We can't keep patching this together. She needs a facility. Somewhere with professionals." "A facility?" Brittany chimed in. "And what if she leaves the stove on again? What if Jackson's here alone? For the record, I hadn't left the stove on. I checked it 3 times every night. That Listung? Not because it was dangerous, but because it was lazy. They didn't even try to make it true. But I didn't correct them. I just let the fiction grow. Let the weeds take over. Because I needed to see who they'd become when they thought I was too far gone to notice. They thought they were playing chess. I was playing a longer game. I kept a journal in the sock drawer next to the ledgers I've always balanced to the penny. The university fund was still untouched. The house still in my name. The retirement accounts. The emergency cash stashed in the ceramic cookie jar, no one ever checked, all still mine. But to them, I was fading. One morning, I caught Brittany and Jackson whispering in the living room. The moment I entered, they froze like children caught drawing on walls. But not before I heard Jackson say, "A place with memory care would cover us legally." Legally. That was the word that told me everything. They weren't worried about me. They were worried about how to take what they hadn't earned without looking like villains. The next time I forgot something, I added a note in my journal. They're not planning my care. They're planning my disappearance. But I didn't panic. I didn't scream. I just let them walk deeper into their own assumptions. I smiled more. Nodded along. Laughed at jokes I didn't hear. I let them believe I was becoming something fragile. Soft. Breakable. Let them believe I was losing myself. Because the truth was far more dangerous to them. I was finding myself. I drew 2 columns in my notebook that night. Who notices who pretends so far? Notices had no names. Pretends was getting crowded. I underlined Jackson's name twice. They called it a casual dinner. Just a few coworkers from Mark's firm. A couple of Brittany's yoga friends. Some neighbors from across the street who always waved but never really knew my name. Nothing formal. Brittany said, "Just grill out. Keep it light? Maybe you can make that lemon cake they love." I said nothing. But I baked the cake anyway. Old habits. They stick to your hands. Your bones. You do it out of memory. Out of some soft, silent belief that maybe this time, they'll notice. They'll thank you. They'll remember who kept this house warm when it was cold and full when they brought it in empty. By 5 o'clock, the backyard smelled like grilling steak and rosy perfume. Laughter floated out through the patio doors sharp. Careless. Unbothered. I stayed in the kitchen. Not one person came in to check on me. Not Mark. Not Brittany. Not even Jackson, who used to sneak licks of frosting off the spatula when he was 9 and thought I didn't notice. I stood by the sink, still wearing my apron. Just out of view. I could hear them laughing, chatting, clinking glasses. I didn't want to join. I just wanted to see what they were like when they thought I wasn't watching. And then I heard Jackson's voice. "So get this," he said. And everyone chuckled before he even finished. "Grandma totally fell into the lake last month." Someone gasped, half amused, half horrified. "She flailed around like a flip turtle." He added, help me, I almost called animal control." A roar of laughter. Real. Belly deep. Shame-proof laughter. She said she hadn't swum in years. And I was like, "Smon? You're fine. She's just one of those old people who weaponize helplessness." More laughter. A few wine-fueled, that's terrible chuckles, terrible in that guilty pleasure way. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I felt my fingers curl into fists. My nails press into the soft skin of my palm. Not from pain. From clarity. Then, Brittany chimed in. Soft and sharp like a scalpel. "She's a liability. I told Mark we need to stop thinking with our hearts and start thinking about the future." Liability? Not mother-in-law. Not grandmother. Not Luna. Just a number. An obstacle. An inconvenient truth. I turned away from the door and walked calmly, slowly to my bedroom. Not a single tear fell. I wasn't sad. Not anymore. Sadness had been replaced. Now there was only resolve. I sat on the bed and listened to the sounds of the party rise and fall like waves crashing on a shore I was no longer standing on. Every laugh they shared added another brick to the wall I was building between myself and this house. They thought I didn't hear. But I heard everything. And for the first time, I felt nothing for them. No hope. No guilt. No confusion. Only distance. I opened my nightstand drawer and pulled out the envelope with Michael Devlin's card. I picked up the phone. He answered on the second ring. "Michael Devlin. It's Luna Hawkins." I said, "I'm ready." He didn't ask what I meant. He didn't need to. "Come in tomorrow," he said. "Bring the documents. Bring your ID." "I already have," I replied. And I had. Everything was in place. The only thing left was the goodbye. I stepped back into the hallway. The laughter from the backyard was softer now, as if muffled by glass. By time. By the weight of everything they'd never bothered to see. The lemon cake sat untouched on the kitchen counter. He took a knife. Cut one perfect slice, not for them, but for me. I sat at the table alone and ate it slowly. Let them toast and gossip and pretend I was invisible. Because soon they would know what it really means to be without me. And this time, my silence wouldn't be a symptom of weakness. It would be my final word. I didn't sleep much that night. I sat at the same desk where I once helped Jackson write his 8th grade science fair report and opened my laptop. The bookmarked website for the Montana STEM Scholarship Fund was already waiting to suction. Cliff and I used to donate to them every year. Quietly. Anonymously. It was one of those things that made us feel like we were still useful after retirement, helping kids like Cliff had once been first generation, broke, and brilliant. Now it was time for something bigger. I clicked Make a Donation. Amount $60. Ling. Designation STEM Scholarship for Rural High School Graduates. Donor name. In memory of Clifford James Hawkins. Anonymous, yes. Before I hit confirm, I paused. I thought of Jackson. Aganina. Sitting cross-legged on the living room floor. Playing that second-hand keyboard I bought him from a retired music teacher. He looked up at me, grinning, and said, "Grandma, this is better than Christmas." I thought maybe, just maybe, that version of him would come back one day. But he didn't. And I couldn't afford to keep paying rent in a story that didn't love me back. I clicked confirm. No fireworks. No dramatic music. Just a quiet message. Thank you for your contribution. I closed the browser and opened another Amtrak. One-way ticket. Departure Sunday morning. From Missoula, Montana, to Ashwood Hills, Oregon. Evelyn had a friend there, a peaceful retirement community that didn't smell like antiseptic or force you into group bingo. There was a garden. A shared workshop. People who played chess without cheating. Perfect. I packed light. 1 suitcase. 3 sweaters. My gardening gloves. Cliff's flannel. A leather-bound journal. And 1 photo me holding baby Jackson in the hospital. His eyes barely open. My smile unguarded. The valuables were already secured. The legal documents handed off. The bank accounts locked. What I left behind were just things, clothes I hadn't worn in years. Kitchen gadgets no one knew how to use but me. Birthday cards with my handwriting, stuffed in drawers like forgotten receipts. Let them sort through it all. Let them figure out what mattered once it was gone. On Friday night, I made one final appearance. I stood in the kitchen doorway while they argued about which movie to stream. I'm heading out with Evelyn this weekend. I said, she wants company on a little road trip. Mark didn't look up. Cool. Jackson grunted and walked past me to the fridge. Brittany was the only one who spoke. Drive safe, she said, folding laundry like she was more worried about mixing whites and colors than the woman who raised her husband. Not one of them asked where I was going. Not one asked why. They assumed, as always, that I'd be back. Because I always came back? The suitcase sat by the front door all evening. I watched them glance at it like a misplaced umbrella. An object. Not a clue. Not one offered to carry it. And I realized this wasn't forgetfulness. It was calculation. They were done pretending. And so was I. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the walls Cliff once painted pale yellow because I said it made the room feel like morning. They were cold now. Soulless. The alarm went off at 5:30 a.m. I moved quietly, like a secret being released. Brushed my hair. Folded the blanket on the bed. Wrote in a notes. Left no message. Evelyn pulled up at 6:00 sharp. Headlights dim. Engine humming low. I took one last look around the living room. The mantel still held a framed picture of Jackson at age 5. I didn't touch it. Some ghosts don't need banishing. They just need a locked door. I stepped outside, suitcase in hand, and closed the front door behind me softly. Finally, no one stirred. Not even Jackson. As Evelyn drove toward the station, she glanced at me. They didn't ask where you were going. Did they? I shook my head. Didn't even look up. She let out a low chuckle. Imagine that. You disappear and no one even notices. I prefer it this way, I said. And I did. At the station, Evelyn hugged me, slipped a small envelope into my hand. Just in case, she said. We didn't cry. Women like us don't cry over freedom. The train arrived. I boarded with one suitcase and no goodbyes. As the town blurred past, swallowed by pines and sky, I finally let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for 30 years. This wasn't a getaway. This was a beginning. Silver Pines was quiet, not the kind of quiet that feels like being forgotten. The kind that wraps around you like a quilt. Gentle. Earned. I had a small apartment, just one bedroom. A little balcony with morning sun. And a kitchenette with drawers that didn't stick. The walls were soft yellow, like the ones Cliff once painted back in Lakefield. And for the first time in years, the silence around me didn't feel like judgment. It felt like peace. I set the photo of baby Jackson on the windowsill, not as an invitation for sentiment, but as a monument, a reminder of what was real and what I could finally let go. That afternoon, I sat at the desk and wrote the letter. Not to Jackson alone. To all of them. Mark, Brittany, Jackson. At the top, I wrote their names like a headline. Not warm. Not cruel. Just factual. And then I began. I was the one who stayed up when Jackson couldn't sleep. I was the one who paid for school supplies, field trips, his asthma medication when your insurance ran out. I was the one who never missed a birthday even when you forgot mine. I was the one who listened, waited, hoped, and in return, you mocked my fear. You minimized my needs. You treated my presence like clutter and my silence like permission. I stopped writing for a moment and placed my hand over my chest. My heart wasn't racing like it used to when I thought about confrontation. It beat calmly, steady, like it approved. I picked up the pen again. This isn't vengeance. I'm not punishing you. But I will no longer fund people who see my love as leverage. The university fund is gone. The inheritance will follow. I've given enough. And now I choose peace. I signed it with my full name. Luna Estelle Hawkins. Not grandma. Not mom. Not the role they reduced me to. A woman. Whole. I sealed the envelope. No return address. No check. No photos. Just truth. I walked to the local post office and mailed it first class. The clerk didn't even look up when he slid it into the bin. Back at Silver Pines, I stopped by the garden behind the commons. Some residents had started a small patch cherry tomatoes, peppers, and wildflowers. An older man named Henry was planting marigolds. He looked up and nodded. First year here, he asked. Yes. I said. Good place. He said simply, no one asks you to prove your worth here. I smiled. For real. That night, I didn't check my phone. I hadn't brought one. If they wanted to talk, they'd have to do it the old way without convenience. Without control. Without expectation. 5 days passed. And on the 5th, the first ripple hit. Michael Devlin emailed me. Subject line, they got your letter. I opened it slowly. A cup of tea in hand. According to Michael, Mark had shown up at his office in a state of disarray 10 years older in his face. 20 pounds of panic in his shoulders. Brittany paced the hallway like she owned it. Jackson looked pale. Not guilty. Just stunned. Like someone had cut the cord and he'd realized the parachute wasn't opening. Michael said they opened the letter expecting instructions. A check. A plea. Instead, they got me. In my handwriting, unfiltered. Unapologetics. And then came the line that hit hardest: the university fund is gone. Redirected to a foundation that values decency over entitlement. Jackson reportedly turned red. Brittany swore under her breath. Mark kept repeating the same phrase like a broken record. We thought she'd wait. Wait, for what? Respect, usefulness, death? No. I had done enough waiting. Michael confirmed the rest. The accounts were locked. The legal access revoked. All future correspondence had to go through him. He ended the email with a line that made me smile. They didn't see this coming. But I did. I sat on my small balcony. Blanca, though, were my niece. Tea growing lukewarm in my hand. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I was free. And for the first time in a long time, they were the ones left listening to silence. The days in Ashwood Hills passed like pages in a well-loved novel, quiet, textured, unhurried. I planted lavender outside my apartment. Not for decoration. For the scent. For the bees. For the woman I was becoming. Every morning, I made coffee exactly how I liked it, black. Strong. With a pinch of cinnamon. Not because Cliff used to drink it that way. Not because Mark preferred cream and sugar. Just because I could. At 74, I finally had full custody of my own life. Isn't that wild? To live decades for others, only to find yourself truly alive in the years they expected you to fade. I joined a watercolor class at the local center. I was terrible. My trees looked like broccoli and my skies bled into rivers of gray. But when I painted, I didn't think about what I'd lost. I thought about what I could still create. There was a man named Henry, same one from the garden. Widowed. Former jazz pianist. He had fingers that still moved with memory. Even if the music had grown slower, we didn't fall in love. Nothing like that. But some afternoons, he'd play while I read. Sometimes we'd sit for hours, not saying a word, just letting our presence be the conversation. It felt enough, and that, perhaps, was the real surprise of this new chapter. Enoughness. For so long, I had mistaken silence for loneliness. Now, I knew better. Some silences heal. Some silences say, you don't have to perform anymore. One morning in early spring, a letter arrived. No return address. But I knew the handwriting. Jackson. The envelope was thick. He had written in pencil, page after page. Erased lines. Then rewritten. It looked like it cost him something, which meant it was worth reading. He started with small things. The weather. School. How weird the house felt. Then came the harder sentences. I didn't know what it meant to be held up by someone until the person holding me let go. Mom and Dad keep trying to act normal. But something's missing. I think it was always you. We just didn't see it, because you made it look easy. I'm sorry for the lake. I'm sorry for laughing. I don't know why I did that. Maybe I was scared of seeing you weak. Maybe I thought if I pretended it didn't matter, I wouldn't have to face how much it did. I set the letter down halfway through. Not because it hurt, but because it felt like medicine and I wanted to take it slowly. He closed the letter with this: if I ever earn your forgiveness, I'd like to visit. Not because I want anything, just because I miss your lemon cake and how you always hummed when you cooked. I didn't realize how much those things mattered until the silence took their place. I didn't cry, but I did place the letter on my nightstand, right next to Cliff's flannel. Not everything had to be forgotten. Some things just needed to be redefined. The next morning, I made lemon cake. For no one but me. I shared some with the neighbors. I even left a slice on Henry's doorstep with a note. Still too sweet. Still worth it. He knocked on my door the next day with 2 mugs of coffee and a smile that didn't ask questions. We sat on the balcony and watched the lavender sway. Birds danced overhead. And for the first time in my life, I didn't wonder what would happen next. I didn't dread the future or grieve the past. I was exactly where I needed to be, and that was enough.